Hey guys, we're going to talk about the changes to minions in Season 15 and how it's affecting wave management. So, as we can see here, there were a bunch of changes that I had initially taken a look at in the patch 15.1 rundown that we did at the start of the season. But the issue is that when you're looking at this list of numbers here, it's a little bit hard to know what to make of all of these changes. Now, the main one that we noticed, of course, is that the first cannon minion is now coming on wave 4 instead of wave 3. And obviously, that's going to have some pretty big effect on how we're thinking about managing our early waves in lane and planning our initial kind of opening of our laning phase, because that is such a large change. But also all of these minion HP changes and things like that, and AD and armor and all these things all add up to a pretty big effect. And now that we've had some time to play with it, I would say that essentially the minions losing HP and also losing AD might mean that minion on minion you don't see a huge effect. But the main thing is that they did not change these by equal percentages. And so, for example, with melee minion HP versus AD, there was a bigger decrease to health than there was to AD, which would suggest that the minions, even on their own, would push a little bit faster. However, ranged minions saw a bigger percentage decrease to their AD than they did to their health, which would suggest, especially because a lot of pushing power, even against melee minions, is coming from these ranged minions, it would suggest that waves would push slower minion on minion. But there's these other things like, and this is a big deal, you can see here that they went from 12 AD to 11 AD, 24 to 21. But they also got these passives here, which is 2% lane minion current HP at minute 1 through 42, and plus 4%. Well, the minutes is for the initial AD, but you can also see melee minions got 4% lane minion current HP. So they have these current HP passives, and these current HP passives are causing minion waves to push a lot faster than before, regardless of the percentage change to HP and AD. So because of these passives that have been added to the minions, even on their own, minion waves are pushing faster. But another thing I want you to keep in mind is that if minions have less HP, champions are also going to push minion waves faster. And most of the pushing that's occurring, or a lot of the pushing that's occurring, is coming from champions, because almost every wave should be contested with people in lane trying to last hit those minions, trying to push to contest early levels and things like that. And so those minions having less HP, even if they have less AD to compensate, is going to be offset by the fact that the minions have this new passive, and champions are going to be pushing faster than before because the minions are squishier. So due to all of these factors, not only do we have the cannon minion coming on wave 4, and then every 3 waves after that still, so we're going wave 4, wave 7, wave 10, whereas before we were starting wave 3, and then every 3 waves after that, so wave 3, wave 6, wave 9. Not only do we have that cannon minion change, but we're also seeing the minion waves push a lot faster than we're used to. Now, to sort of compensate for this, of course, we should understand that minions take a fixed amount of damage from turrets, so this doesn't affect last hitting minions under turret, because when a minion gets hit by a turret, no matter what level it is, no matter how much HP it has, there is a fixed amount of turret shots that it takes to kill that minion, because minions have a passive, that says that they take, I'm trying to remember which one this is for, probably melee minions, but they take like 30% of their HP or something like that. That can't be right. Let's see, melee minions take, I think, 45% of their HP to turrets, but they have a fixed amount of damage, a fixed amount of percentage of their HP that they take to turrets. So minions are going to die to turrets at the same speed, because that's obviously an important question, or important to know. But minion turret damage and minion damage to champions has been increased by 5%. So this is actually going to be a big deal, because if minions are dying just as fast to turrets as before, but have extra damage to towers, that could end up being a big deal. So that's important to keep in mind as well. So we'll kind of go through this, but the main gist of it is that the cannon minion timers are changing, and how is that going to affect when we want to do things with our wave management? And then number two, the minion waves are pushing really, really fast compared to what people expect. So what I want to do is just run through a basic kind of understanding of how minion waves interact and how we would have approached dealing with the first 3 or 4 minion waves on the previous patch or last season versus what we're going to do this season. And so this is obviously meant to be champions, but we're going to count each one of these as a wave. We're just using it as a marker for a wave. And so we can see that, for example, our first wave is going to meet their first wave right here in the middle. But hopefully, generally, we're going to be contesting them for level 2. And if we're contesting them for level 2 and, fighting to push the wave, what can end up happening here is, in an ideal world, we're going to want to contest their wave, and we're going to kill their wave, and they're going to kill our wave. And then our second waves are going to arrive. But if we've pushed a little bit and some of our minions are still alive from the first wave, just a few minions, then what's going to happen here is their second minion wave is going to get caught on our first minion wave dying. And so rather than being right in the center, we're going to have pushed them a little bit towards their side of the lane. And then we're going to kill their first 3 melee minions in bot lane, gives you level 2. So we'll kill half of this second wave to get level 2, but we'll be somewhat on their side of the lane because we have a push advantage and we pushed in order to get level 2 first, and then we look for some sort of fight or trade off of the level 2 advantage that we get, and then eventually we're going to kill off their second wave, and our second wave is going to crash into their turret. This is very different than what happened last season, because last season when we had this situation, rather than our, killing their wave and our wave crashing into their turret, if we pushed especially the remainder of their second wave slow enough, what would end up happening is their third wave would actually come here, the cannon wave, and our third wave would be here. So these are going to be at the same spot. So if our third wave is at their turret or our turret, then their third wave is going to be at their turret. And basically what would happen is the cannon wave would hold up our second wave, and then we could shove in the cannon wave, and by the time we shoved in and killed their third wave, now we're crashing our third wave, plus maybe some minions from our second wave, and we're crashing this massive wave with a cannon minion into their turret, and now we can take like a recall and things like that. The dynamic has changed here completely, because what's happening instead is, if we go back and look at these second and third waves, rather than us killing their second wave really slowly and then our waves crashing once we kill the cannon wave, instead of it getting caught like this, instead they would get caught like this, and there's no cannon minion. And so essentially what's happening here is our second wave is crashing earlier than we want. And this is all due to the fact that the minions are squishier. We're not dealing with cannon minions yet because there's no cannon until the fourth wave. We're still looking at waves 2 and 3. So the problem here is that our wave is crashing, even if we are trying to slow push it, because if we've pushed enough level 1 and we've pushed enough on wave 1 and on wave 2, our wave is going to crash no matter what. This is really different than last season, because last season our wave would only crash wave 2 if we pushed it really, really hard. If we were pushing really hard level 1, pushing really hard level 2, then it could crash, but it wouldn't crash like this. It would crash and then get killed, and the third wave wouldn't get caught on it, or it would not crash at all if we were pushing it slower, and then we'd have to kill their third wave, their cannon wave coming in front of their turret. So it makes a huge difference here in how we're going to play the second and the third wave out, because we need to know how to deal with this second wave. And if you know that the second wave is going to crash let's just say in bot lane, the second wave is going to crash, in my opinion, 100% of the time. In top lane and mid lane, there are some specific circumstances, mainly range versus melee matchups, in which you can prevent this from happening and still do a 3-wave crash. But in my opinion and my experience from what I've seen this season, a 3-wave crash is no longer possible in bot lane, and it's very rare in top lane and mid lane to even be able to do a 3-wave crash. So 3-wave crash is something that should really only be happening if you're playing a ranged versus melee matchup and you do certain things to make a 3-wave crash happen that are much more specific than last season. But in bot lane and in most other situations in mid lane and top lane, you are probably going to want to just full clear and crash wave 2 as early as possible. The reason for this is because if you slow push this wave like we talked about, and their third wave gets caught here on the turret, on our minion wave, then rather than our third wave meeting their third wave in the middle, instead, because their wave got stuck, our third wave will meet their third wave right outside of the front of their turret. And this is the worst possible spot we could be in because we don't have room to fight them. We're all in them here. We're not even really in a position to take turret plates or anything like that. Even if we were to somehow crash here, we're only going to crash half of a cannon wave, not really a full wave to push or anything like that. It's not a good spot if our jungler is finishing their full clear around this time and coming to try to gank us. And it's not a good spot if the enemy jungler is coming to us, because now we're overextended in the lane and in the best possible spot that we could be in if we want to get ganked by the enemy jungler. So this is a terrible, terrible spot to be in if you let your second wave, dying, hold back their third wave. So there's really two ways to prevent this. The first way to prevent this is to just fast crash this, second wave before their third wave arrives. And if this wave dies or mostly dies and there's 1 or 2 ranged minions left when this gets here, it's going to reset to mostly the center or right around the center. And this is going to be fine for you. And then you're going to have this neutral third wave. The other way, like I said, especially if you're thinking about a lane other than bot lane, is you could get this to not work like this if you push the first wave and the second wave as slowly as possible, meaning you're only last hitting for the first wave and the second wave. If you do that, then you can still achieve what we did last season with this 3-wave crash or whatever, wave 3 crash, probably comprised of minions from your second and third wave. But the only way to achieve that is if you're last hitting like that. Well, in bot lane, if you're last hitting like that, you're never getting level 2 first. So you're essentially conceding level 2, and the circumstances aren't going to be that you're slightly pushing into them and building up this crash, because if you're barely pushing and barely touching the wave at all, they're probably pushing into you. And so you've given up control of the wave and of the lane in the first place. So you're not going to get a crash like this in bot lane. It's not possible to 3-wave crash in bot lane. In mid lane and in top lane, it works exactly the same way. The only difference is that, and we'll show some examples of this, in a range versus melee matchup, as the ranged champion in mid lane or top lane, you are capable of forcing the opponent to only last hit, because in a lot of situations, if they know how to play it properly, they're going to just barely try to last hit minions while preserving their HP. Maybe they're even going to give up some CS on the first wave, because as a range versus melee situation, they're not going to be able to walk up and hit the minions without getting poked. So you threaten poke wave 1 and wave 2, but what you're actually doing is choosing to only last hit the minions yourself. So you're not over pushing them at all. You're pushing as slowly as possible. If you push as slowly as possible in that range versus melee matchup in mid lane or top lane, then the ranged champion's pushing the wave as slowly as possible because they've agreed to do that. They've decided that that's their game plan. And the champion that is the melee champion is consenting to do that and to only kind of agreeing to also only hit the minions as last hitting because they're worried about getting poked. So in that, 10% of scenarios, maybe where you're in a range versus melee matchup in mid or a range versus melee matchup in top lane, it is true that you can achieve that. So let's look at what that might look like, and we'll get into some examples in game 2 because I know that this isn't the clearest thing in the world. So you have your first wave here in like mid lane. This is going to be the same thing for top lane, and you're just both last hitting the minions. The melee champion's last hitting the minions because they're scared of getting poked, and the ranged champion is last hitting minions strategically for the wave. So the first wave gets cleared out, and then the second wave is coming in, and the second wave comes in, and now you're hitting the second wave as slow as possible. Maybe there's still some minions from the first wave or whatever here when the second wave is here, but it doesn't really matter. You just, the first and second wave, you're just last hitting as slow as possible. And then when this third wave comes in, which again still is not a cannon wave, it's just a regular wave, but when this third wave comes in, then you can fast push or slow push this third wave into their turret, and then you get a crash of a mix of minions from your third and second wave into their turret, sort of thing. And so they get the opportunity to farm that, but then because you've crashed this big wave back into their turret, when the fourth wave comes, their fourth wave, which is a cannon wave, gets stopped here by your minions dying under the turret, which you want to have happen in this range versus melee matchup, because now when your third and your fourth wave come, they're here, which is not the safest spot, but in mid lane it's definitely less of a big deal, and we're here on wave 4, which is a lot later than we would be too worried about potentially the gank window. And now this is going to slow push into us, so that we get a situation where, especially wave 5, the wave ends up back on our side of the map, and they're stuck in a range versus melee matchup where they've only had one wave that they could farm under their tower, cannon wave for a tiny little bit of time in a favorable position on their side of the map, but you're protected by having your own cannon minion, and you're pressuring in the range versus melee matchup, and especially in mid, you're not as vulnerable to the gank, which is the only downside to that. But then, you have their fifth wave completely frozen, and now you've set up kind of a perma-freeze for yourself versus a melee champion. So you can get away with that in mid lane or top lane as a ranged matchup, but the only way to achieve that, like I said, is to push as slowly as possible wave 1 and wave 2. So let's reset this here. So that, that's basically the idea, is that in my opinion, I think a wave 3 crash is just not viable in bot lane. And you're only going to look to do that if you're range versus melee in top or mid. Otherwise, you should just, in bot, top, and mid, 90% of the time, 100% of the time in bot lane, 90% of the time in top or mid, you should just be crashing your second wave as soon as possible so that their third wave clears, and doesn't get caught up on your second wave under their turret. If you do that, then your third wave will be neutral, and then your third wave right here will meet back in the middle, and then this becomes a decision wave, a wave where it's neutral again, and you can make a decision on what to do with the wave. In most situations, at a high level, the third wave is going to be dictated by what you want to do based on the information that you have about the junglers. So for example, let's say that you know that your jungler is pathing to you and you don't know where the enemy jungler is. You want to stay safe from a potential gank from the enemy jungler, and you want to set up your jungler to gank you. So you want the wave back here, which means you want to let them push on the third wave. And then if a fourth wave comes or something like that, they end up, stuck with this push that they have going on, right on that gank timer as your jungler is finishing their full clear. They're going to get stuck right here, right in front of your turret, just by you letting them push. So you let them make that mistake, and then your jungler comes and kills them on this wave. Even if your jungler doesn't come or is pathing away from you or something like that, you've put yourself in a position where you're very safe against the enemy jungler because you're not overextended at all and you're too close to your tower to kill or do anything to. So letting them push this third wave into you is almost always good because you almost always never know where their jungler is. And so if you never know where their jungler is, if your jungler is pathing towards you, it sets up a gank. And if your jungler is pathing away from you, it protects you from a gank. So it's really just good to let them push the third wave into you so that you find yourself in this situation where you're just in a really safe spot. Now, there are situations where you may not want to do this, although I think it's a little bit rare as well. For example, if you have information on the enemy jungler, you saw them on a ward that you had in their jungle, or you warded their raptors, or they take an early gank, in another lane or something like that, and you know the enemy jungler is not coming to you, then you could continue to just push and try to do turret damage, in which case you might want to slow push the third wave in, and then you would crash the fourth wave. So we're slow pushing into them, and then we're going to, crash the couple of minions left from our third wave, and the minions from our fourth wave, we're going to crash that into their turret, and be able to take that early recall like we used to do on wave 3 with the cannon wave. Now we're just doing it with wave 4. So you have this pattern. If you're just trying to push, if you're a champion like Caitlyn, you just want to push turret plates down and that sort of thing, the pattern is to slow push wave 1, fast push wave 2, slow push wave 3, fast push wave 4, slow push wave 5, fast push wave 6, etc. You're not building up these huge 3-wave stacks anymore that take 3 waves to achieve. You're just doing 2 waves at a time in order to achieve 1 slow push, then 1 fast push in order to achieve a crash. And that is going to result in you taking turrets the fastest, but it makes you very vulnerable to ganks because you're constantly pushing. So the time that you don't want to be pushing like this is on that third wave, depending on what's going on with the junglers. Another situation, this is more common, I would say, in top lane than it is in bot lane, but it can happen in bot lane too. If they've really gotten beaten up and taken some really bad trading, level 1 or wave 1 or whatever, wave 2, one thing that you can do on the third wave is, regardless of the junglers, you can continue to push into them on that neutral third wave that we had. Let's go back to that. If you've got this neutral third wave in the middle here, you can continue to push into them. So you're again slow pushing that third wave and then waiting for a crash on the fourth wave to either set up a dive onto them, but again, that's probably not going to happen. A wave 4 dive in low elo is not going to happen. But in high elo, that's very, very reasonable. Like if you get them super low, it's totally possible that if your jungler's coming, you just want to turret dive them instead of, and maybe they're not willing to or can't push into you anyways on the third wave. And so you're just stacking up a wave to dive them. That would be a totally acceptable way to play it. Maybe your jungler's not coming, but you believe that your champion is capable of 1v2ing or 2v3ing if you're in bot lane. At the current HP that you've got in their lane or two. Now that shouldn't probably be possible to 1v2. I don't think there's a champion that can 1v2 if you're a lane opponent and you are both full HP, but if you've beat them in trading early on and you feel like you can, outplay a 1v2 or waste their jungler's time or something like that, then potentially you can just keep shoving the third wave, and basically accept that you're going to get ganked. In order to, try to beat them in that situation or waste their jungler's time or something like that is another reason why you might want to push the third wave. But essentially, just to recap this again, and then we'll jump into some examples in game, is that if we go back here, wave 1, we're trying to push for level 2, but just like before, where you can over push for level 2 and accidentally end up pushing too close to their turret and not have any room to do anything with your level 2, just like that situation before, it's even easier to do that. So you need to be really conscious that you're not over pushing wave 1 in order to get level 2 first. Okay, so we're pushing wave 1, so we should be slightly ahead of them in the push. We're just trying to outpace them in pushing. We should be an auto attack or 2 ahead of them, maybe a minion ahead of them, but not much more than that, because if we're much more than a minion or 2 ahead of them, now all of a sudden we're pushing our wave way too hard, especially on this current season. So then when we've pushed this in, we've killed off their minion wave, their first minion wave, a little bit before they've killed off our first minion wave. The second minion wave is coming, and we're trying to get level 2 off of that second minion wave coming in. So we've got this second minion wave coming in here, and unfortunately, if we slow push this wave as if we're trying to create a 3-wave crash, especially if we were already a little bit ahead of them in the push because we were getting level 2 first, what will happen is we will crash this in a way that the 3rd wave gets caught on it. So instead, what we want to do is we want to fast shove this 2nd wave into their turret so that it dies and clears out before their 3rd wave gets there, so that the 3rd waves meet back in the middle in a neutral state. And then we want to all of a sudden let them get tempo in the lane and start pushing us in on this 3rd wave, so that now our jungler, whoever, can come gank them right around this timer where they're finishing their full clear. And then you're going to get reinforced by your cannon wave, and you're going to be able to push, you're going to be able to push them back because your cannon wave is getting here faster. And so you can just, once that gank timer has evaporated or you've done something with it, then you can, these 3rd waves get cleared. Yours is a little bit delayed because it got hung up on their 3rd wave if they were pushing. So now you've just got this really nice freeze situation, and you can either keep this safe on your side of the map for pretty much as long as you want, or you can, start clearing their wave quicker and start pushing them back to their side of the map. As we talked about, in top lane and mid lane, it's the exact same thing. Unless you're in a range versus melee matchup, you can still do a 3-wave crash, which is much better for you if you're ranged versus melee. And so what that's going to look like is wave 1, we're only last hitting as the range champion, and the melee champion's forced to last hit in order to preserve their HP. Same thing with wave 2. You're just, slow pushing this in, only last hitting, where you can, making sure to not chunk the wave out with your abilities. And then you're going to get this, nice 3-wave crash here. Once you kill off their 3rd wave, you're going to get this nice, wave 3, 2-wave crash kind of thing going into their turret. And then that's going to hold up their 4th wave when their 4th wave arrives to their turret, which is the cannon wave, which is then going to cause their cannon wave to be in this position where it's on their side of the map, which means that their 5th wave is also going to reinforce first, which means that this is going to start to clear out your wave first and push into you. And now you're going to be able to maintain a freeze permanently using that cannon wave on your side of the map, and it gives you a lot of options and a lot of power over the melee champion because they can't do anything about their wave, and their wave ends up getting stuck regardless of what they're doing. So now let's take a look at some in-game examples. Okay, first up, we're going to look at a bot lane example from a recent game of mine in Challenger. And we can see that we have Braum Jinx versus Tristana Yuumi. And again, even if we're in a matchup where we don't think we're capable of getting the push and getting level 2 first, we're going to at least attempt to do that. And because Yuumi's too focused on trading with us instead of hitting the minion wave, we're actually able to get the push and get level 2 first. Despite the fact that we're in a double range matchup against us. So we're going to be able to hit level 2 first here, but as you can see, Jinx has slightly overshoved the first wave by using that rocket just a little bit too much. And so since we've killed their first 3 melee minions, but we are still a full, 2.5, 3 minions ahead of them or whatever, what's happened here is our second wave is very, very much on their side of the map. So we have very little room to fight. But that's okay, because we're just going to want to crash this against a Yuumi. Yuumi Tristana, we're probably not going to find a good fight here anyways. But still, you can see how delicate this is and how hard this is to do on the new season, because it's super easy to overpush that first wave. That even, this would have never happened before, that a Braum, Jinx would be able to overpush the first wave against like a double range matchup. So, if we go back to looking at this first wave here, you can see that Jinx just needs to be outpacing them. So right here we have all 3 of our ranged minions and 1 melee minion left. And at this point we're pretty even with them. And now we're ahead of them in the push. Rocketing here is probably a bit of a mistake, because we really need to last hit these minions so that we can delay our wave moving up as long as possible so we have more room to fight. So for example, if we had last hit those minions and these minions didn't move up for another second, we would have had the wave here and had much more room to fight. But you can see how it's very difficult to find a good level 2 situation anymore compared to what it used to be, because you need to guarantee that you're going to hit level 2 before them. But if you over push by even 1 or 2 minions, all of a sudden the room in which you have to fight with that level 2 advantage is very, very small. So I think it's going to be much harder to find level 2 fights, especially in bot lane, because of how easy it is to over push. But people are going to have to start paying a lot of attention to how fast they're pushing the first wave in bot lane because of these changes. So we're going to need to fast crash this second wave as soon as possible. And you can see I probably should be focusing on the wave instead of, hitting the Yuumi there, because that's not really accomplishing anything. But regardless, it took us a little bit longer than we might want, but we're going to crash the second wave here. And even though it's not perfect, we're going to still crash this. And like I said, even if it's hung up by 1 minion or something, it's going to reset to mostly neutral, because there's not a ton of minions that it's getting caught on. So it's not quite perfectly in the center of the lane, but it's mostly neutral. And then look at what happens on this wave 3. Now we have to make a decision, because wave 3 is a decision wave. And so we're going to, think about what situation we're in here relating to the junglers and stuff like that. We know that Diana is on her way full clearing towards bot, especially because his name is full clear only 1, 2, 3, and we don't know where Talon is, so we can assume that he could possibly be coming to gank us as well. You can see that I went and warded while that second wave was crashing. That's what we did with that little bit of time that we had. Very interesting to note that in this game, our Yasuo also crashed wave 2 and also warded the exact same second I warded. So perfect mirror image. We don't know where their jungler is, but we're both crashing wave 2 and we're both warding on that timer in case their jungler comes. The reason why we really like this ward timer is because it's early enough that if he were to 3 camp, you can see he's done 3 camps right now. If the jungler was to 3 camp and gank bot or top, you're going to spot that out with the early duration of this ward without running into their jungler while placing it. But the ward duration is going to last long enough that you're also going to see the tail end of a full clear gank. So even if they full clear and then come to your lane, you're going to see that as well. So it covers both an early gank and a later gank. The only thing this doesn't cover is if their jungler is a complete degenerate and ganks you level 2 off of doing their buff, but that hopefully will never happen to you. I feel bad if that happens to you, but hopefully their jungler loses something for doing that. That should put their jungler behind in tempo compared to your jungler, and your jungler should be able to steal away their camps and stuff like that for it. But it is what it is if that happens to you. It's a sad day when you get level 2 ganked. So obviously, third wave, like we said, we're going to let them shove into us because it puts us in a great position to set up the gank for the Diana, and it protects us from a potential gank from Talon. And they really shouldn't do this, right? They should want the same thing. They don't know where our jungler is, and Diana could be coming bot, which she is, and they actually know that their jungler is coming bot as well. So they have the exact same jungle information that we do, and yet for them, instead of making the decision to let us push in, they make a mistake. Tristana pushes the wave, her champion also kind of naturally pushes, which sucks for them really bad, and Yuumi walks up to try to Q and push us off of the wave. And so even if we weren't thinking about this decision, they're kind of forcing us into this situation in the first place. So now the waves are crashing and starting to push into us even more once this fourth wave, the cannon wave, arrives into the lane. And so now we're in this really, really great spot for ganking them, because they're stuck right in front of our turret. Now in this particular game, in this bot lane, the wave management didn't matter a ton. You can even see here how when they try to go and crash wave 4, this is, you know, the most pathetic crash I've ever seen. They crash one cannon minion into our turret, and that is it. Their ranged minions kind of luckily RNG into our turret, but you know, even that, their ranged minions, one of them's not even in range of the turret. If the other two hadn't RNG'd and pulled and walked into our turret, they would have been also out of range of the turret. So they have no ability to push or even touch our turret with this wave. And so, you know, our wave's just in a really good spot. They're just stuck for so long in front of our turret because we did this wave 2 crash. You know, and so in this particular game, their jungler ends up getting caught and doing scuttle crab, and to be honest, this doesn't really have a whole lot to do with our wave state. It just has to do with me moving before their bot lane does, even though we were getting pushed in a little bit, so in theory they should be able to move faster. Tristana probably should have moved up the river for Talon, but did not recognize that situation fast enough, and again, that just doesn't have a whole lot to do with the wave. So now that we get a kill, obviously, like we talked about in most situations, and same thing previous season, we're going to just fast shove this wave as quickly as we can to get the wave into the turret so that we create a bounce back into our side of the map. Yuumi's going to try to hold this wave and get them a freeze, and we're just going to walk at her, take an extra second before we recall to stop her from doing that so that she can't do that. So very, very basic opening. What we're going to do is we're going to go back in this same game, and now we're going to watch how Yasuo plays top lane, and we're going to watch him do the exact same thing as bot lane with his wave, because obviously, you know, top laners are going to want to know that this works the same in top lane. So here we have a situation where, you know, wave 1 is coming in, Yasuo is bullying the Rise. Take a turret shot, that's pretty unfortunate. They're both shoving wave 1 pretty quickly here. And then Yasuo crashes wave 2 quickly as he can, just like we did bot, pretty much the exact same time. And you can see I go for this ward right at the same time as Yasuo goes for this ward. So it's a solved puzzle. You know, it's the same thing in top lane and bot lane. We're doing the exact same thing. Now here we have a little bit of a weird situation, I would say, because again, this third wave is meant to be neutral, right? And what is the decision that we would make based off of what I was saying before? We know that Yasuo has the opposite jungle information sort of to what we do, which is he knows his jungler is pathing away from him and he's now playing the weak side of the map. So we also don't know where Talon is, which is why he warded as well. In theory, Talon could be full clearing towards top. We don't really know in game yet. So if I was Yasuo here, I would want my wave in a safe spot, unless I felt like because of the trading I did with Rise, I could 1v2. But I don't think I could 1v2 here, because, you know, I've lost so much HP, unfortunately, to these turret shots, that I don't think I could 1v2 here. So I would want my wave back here. So I would actually want to let Rise push this wave and push me back into a safe spot here. However, something kind of weird happens. Because Yasuo is taking a very threatening stance instead of standing back here, and was sitting in this bush and threatening to eat through the minions and kill Ryze if he walks up, Ryze has just decided to actually commit to recalling right here. Now, Yasuo makes what in my opinion is a mistake here, which is I think as soon as you see Ryze recall, you should shove this minion wave as fast as possible to make sure that Ryze, no matter what, is forced to TP back right here. And because if Ryze is going to TP back in with full HP and you don't know where the enemy jungler is, you do not want to be stuck in lane versus Ryze getting to go back and purchase something on full HP when you're half HP. You don't want that to happen. If you shove this, this gives yourself the best chance of not having to use your own TP to get back into lane because he obviously recalled and allowed you to push. So maybe you don't even have to TP back yourself. But if Ryze is able to TP back in and start shoving the wave as fast as he can, and you do need to end up TPing, then you just TP back as Yasuo, but you're, trading TP for TP and you're back in a good situation. Unfortunately, Yasuo does not make the split-second decision to shove this wave, and let's see what happens here as a result. So he does not shove this very quickly. So the wave is no longer on his side, or, well, it wasn't ever really, but, he didn't allow the Ryze to push him in, so he's not in a safe spot at all here. Ryze has been able to go back and purchase a refillable potion. I'm assuming he started with regular potions, so it's not the biggest buy in the world, but it is power that he has that Yasuo no longer has and no longer has access to. And of course, for the time being, Ryze is level 2 and Yasuo is level 3, but that advantage is going to go away soon, and Ryze has a health advantage over Yasuo now because Ryze got to get his back off. So at this point in the lane, even though Yasuo should be winning because he's outplaying and trading really well with the Ryze, with the exception of the turret shots that he's taken, I suppose, instead he's actually in a really vulnerable position here because his wave is pushing away from him and he's very low on HP. So he almost dies as a result, but luckily he's able to trade flash for flash, and now he's able to recall. But imagine too, had Talon been here, you can see on the map now that Talon's full cleared all of his camps. Had Talon been here on this timer and had not been going towards bot this game, especially because this ward isn't super effective against Talon because he can hop this wall here, Ryze could have just killed Yasuo with Talon here. So rather than letting Ryze get away with that TP shenanigans, I would have liked to see Yasuo fast shove that third neutral wave since Ryze went back, and then either teleported back if he needed to, or just straight up walk back into lane, creating either a TP advantage for himself, or at least keeping himself in a safe spot, and not creating that vulnerability to get solo killed or die to the wave. But we can see that more or less the way that he played the first two waves especially was really exactly the same as you would play it in bot lane. Now let's go and look at the same thing in mid lane. And I guess it's worth noting, right, that this was a range versus melee matchup. So in theory, this could have been one of the matchups where, Ryze is in control of the lane and chooses to only auto and last hit. But the Ryze Yasuo dynamic is a good example, actually, of how just because it's range versus melee doesn't mean that you can necessarily do what we're going to see in mid lane here in this next two examples. Because in this case, especially with Yasuo able to take E level 1, we actually saw that just because Ryze is a range champion doesn't mean that he beats Yasuo level 1. In fact, it looks pretty clear to me that if the Yasuo is playing properly, it looks pretty clear to me that Yasuo wins level 1. So if Yasuo is winning level 1, you're not going to be able to do that as the Ryze because you're not going to force the melee champion to only last at the minions. Yasuo is going to be able to push faster using his E. He's going to be able to out-trade you and threaten you. And so even though it's range versus melee, in this particular range versus melee matchup in top lane, you're not going to see that same level of I guess, like zoning control from the range champion level 1. So it even depends on the range versus melee matchup, which is why I say 90% of the time in top lane and in mid lane, and 100% of the time in bot lane, you need to just be fast crashing that wave too. So now let's take a look at an example of what happens if we have a true punishing range versus melee matchup, maybe with a bit of a player gap here. I think we probably have a filled Malphite player versus Jensen on the Aurora in this game. And we're just going to watch how Jensen plays this quite beautifully. So what he knows is that he's just going to want to last hit these minions at the very last second, because in this range versus melee matchup, like we talked about, you're going to be able to still do the classic 3-wave crash, which is then going to cause that 4th wave and 5th wave to push into you. So you're going to be able to have full control for the longest duration possible. The other thing that's really cool to note is that people oftentimes don't understand this concept that last hitting does not just mean last hitting as soon as you're able to kill the creep and get the gold from it, because you're able to do enough damage for the last hit to work properly. A lot of times last hitting at a high level, and when done properly, means waiting until the minion as low as humanly possible before dealing the final blow. So we can see here that Jensen could start last hitting all 3 of these minions right about now, but instead of doing that, he's going to hold off and wait, even canceling this auto attack here before finally committing to finishing off this minion, because he is really wanting to slow down this push as much as possible. You can really see how well Jensen is min-maxing, this slow push here. And Malphite, right, is just not able to walk up and push at all because, well, for one, he's scared and filled, and 2, because it's range versus melee, and he's very scared of getting poked. So if you can find these situations where either both laners are consenting to push very, very slowly the first and the second wave, or you're able to prevent the enemy laner from hitting the wave at all, you can slow push like this and build up a bigger wave for that wave 3 crash. So Jensen continuing to just only last hit this second wave. Very, very, very slow push here. And so now he finally crashes his second wave, but very, very, very slowly. And now he's going to need to do something very different than he's done on the first 2 waves, which is he wants to crash now his 3rd wave as quickly as possible. And so he finally, for the first time, uses an ability on the minions and actually is okay with pushing this really, really quickly. So you can see he's no longer last hitting, he's throwing auto attacks into minions when it's not going to kill them. He's just trying to shove this in as quickly as possible here. And now what this does is these 3 ranged minions are going to cause Malphite's 4th wave, this cannon wave, to stop moving forward and get caught here under the turret, which now means Malphite is in a decent spot for this 1 wave, but the next wave coming out of Fountain right now is going to reinforce this cannon wave quicker, because the cannon wave is on Malphite's side of the map. He actually just continues pushing this in. So there's no reinforcement because the wave's dying that quick. So unfortunately, one of the things that's important to understand about mid lane too is that mid lane is not very vulnerable to getting ganked, especially versus certain champions, like at level 4 Diana. So mid lane can just kind of shove. You can just kind of shove on mid lane, and that's what we're seeing here. But, this is an example of that 3-wave crash, and then we have the collapse going on with the Talon again that we see. So let's hop into another game. So there's some level 1 shenanigans in this game, and that is going to have somewhat of an impact, mostly on mid lane, and maybe on all the lanes, but there's some level 1 shenanigans going on in this game. I don't know how many times I have to tell these guys to stop trying to do anything level 1 versus my Braum, but it is what it is. So let's start with mid lane, since we just finished with that, and then we'll take a look at the other lanes. Nefiri is busy pinging and flaming his support here. So because of that, he's not contesting the first wave. Now, I don't know if he's okay with this because he's a melee champion into a ranged champion again, and so he just knows that he's not going to be able to do much to contest the first wave, or whether he's just late to do anything about this because they're busy flaming each other. I do not know the answer to that, unfortunately. You know, but what we see is that the Aurora in this game plays it very, very differently to the Aurora in Jensen's game. Instead of methodically last hitting the minions and building up a slow push, he just crashes wave 1 into Nefiri's turret, allowing Nefiri to, well, Nefiri's still just doing nothing, I suppose. He's still scared of the poke. But essentially, you know, think about what we got off of hitting level 2 here first. And another big deal is off of the 2 assists that Aurora got in this game, level 1, he was able to get level 2 off of just the first 6 minions dying off of the first wave. He didn't need one of these melee minions from, you know, from the second wave. So that was a bit of a weird circumstance. But what did he get to do with his level 2? Nothing. Because he had his enemy mid laner under tower completely safe when he got level 2. So when you push wave 1 this fast, getting level 2 first doesn't mean anything because the other guy's going to hit level 2, you know, right here off of this minion. He's going to hit level 2 before you get to do anything with your level 2 power spike. And in fact, fishing for this ability usage right here is probably a result of I'm trying to do something with the fact that I got level 2 first, and so I'm very aggressively walking at you to try to do something. But because Nefiri gets level 2, now he just gets all in. Because now Nefiri's the same level as him, and even though Nefiri lost a little bit of CS in the beginning, they're the same level, and if Nefiri can get on, you know, on top of the Aurora and in melee range, Nefiri's just going to win that and kill them. So you see how bad it is if you don't, you know, follow the principles of wave management and just slightly outpace the push. If you go too quickly, then you're going to waste your level 2 advantage and just allow them to safely farm for free until they're at the same power level as you, and then they can fight you. So you're just going to do nothing with your level 2 spike. So let's take a look at the same game from bot lane's perspective. Let's see here. So you can see that, you know, we're a little bit late to the wave, but we're obviously, you know, pretty even right now in the push. It's a little bit tough. We're in another Braum versus double range matchup again in bot lane. And so, you know, sometimes it's going to be hard for us to contest level 2, especially with the bush control that they have right now. So it looks like we're losing the level 2 push here because I don't really have access to hit the wave. And so we're just going to back up and concede the level 2. Now pay really close attention here. Remember that when they hit level 2, their goal is to shove this wave in and crash their second wave as soon as possible. And look at what they do. Because they're trying, just like our Aurora did, to force some sort of advantage to happen with their level 2, X-Special on Elise here is Hex flashing out of the bush and throwing Cocoon at me, even though I'm out of range. And Ezreal is not focused on hitting the minions at all. He's, you know, still fishing for Qs and stuff like that, watching what's happening up here and not hitting the minions at all. So because Ezreal is, you know, taking so long to hit the minions and just last hitting here instead of shoving this wave in, he's doing what you would have done last season, which is, you know, even if it doesn't look like we have something to gain off of the level 2, we're just going to do our best to look for something, and then we're going to last hit and build up this push. But look at what happens when you try to last hit and build up this push. Again, you have one of these really weak crashes, and they actually push it so slow that instead of their range minions coming under the turret and our third wave getting caught on that, they actually just hand us a freeze off of the second wave. So we have a freeze now on wave 3 because their range minions didn't even make it into our turret. The reason why their range minions didn't make it into our turret is that you know, their wave 2 is pushing so slow that they don't even get them into our turret. So now we just have a freeze, which is great for us. You know, same thing, we're analyzing what do we want to do with where the jungler is and stuff like that. Well, our jungler's coming bot, and we don't know where the enemy jungler is. So same exact situation as last game. So we have them right where we want them. We want them right in front of our turret. It might have been difficult because we'd have to be standing right in front of them, but I think it would have been interesting here to see if we could have walked up and, you know, held these 3 minions, especially because they've just used Cocoon and Q. So it would have been interesting to see if we could have held these 3 minions here and continued to have sort of a freeze on them here. But we might have taken too much poke to do it. But either way, they are going to get the wave and get the wave to kind of reset here. So now we have a neutral 4th wave instead. So we're back to a neutral 4th wave. So same thing. It's a little bit of a weird situation, what happened with the push, but same question as we had when we had a neutral 3rd wave. That was a question. We want them to shove into us because our jungler is coming and we don't know where their jungler is. Do a little trading. That's not ideal. We probably shouldn't have been trading here, but it's fine. Well, either way, regardless, because of the trading and whatnot, they do start shoving us back in again. Now on wave 5, they're shoving back into us. And again, our jungler didn't end up coming bot. He ended up going for a kill mid. But you know, had our jungler wanted to come bot, we certainly did our best, I think, for the most part, to keep the wave in front of our turret. And we definitely kept ourselves in a safe spot in this lane most of the time and suffered no real disadvantage from being in that melee versus range matchup. You know, so we can see pretty good state here. So now let's go back and look at top lane. And this top lane situation is actually another example of a ranged versus melee top lane situation, although it's a little bit strange because they both use flash. Azir has an item advantage on Gangplank because he's 1-0, so he's got Dagger up on Gangplank. And Gangplank is sort of a pseudo-range champion in the sense that he can Q from range. And so he sort of plays like a range champion, but versus a real range champion like Azir, it's still more like a range versus a melee matchup than a pseudo-range matchup. So you can see they both get here a little bit late, which is part of what's contributing to them last hitting really slowly here. Azir goes for some extra auto attacks on this minion. Gangplank hit a barrel here. Azir gets level 2 first. But you can see it's a little bit, you know, Gangplank was okay with not rushing for level 2 here. He didn't try to over push or push really hard to get level 2 before the Azir. He just was okay with hitting it a little bit after the Azir, which is fine, and he didn't take any, you know, negative trade from it. But now he's sort of, you know, backed up here and given priority with the shove to the Azir, and because they both slow push this wave 1, Azir can do potentially kind of a 3-wave crash thing instead of a 2-wave crash. So you can see here how Azir has these 3 range minions left, and he's going for that classic 3-wave crash build up here instead of doing what we talked about with the 2-wave crash. So again, if you're pushing that wave 1 and that wave 2 slow enough, especially in these range versus melee matchups where the other person's not really able to walk up and hit the minions, you're definitely able to do this 3-wave crash instead. So now we're going to see the same thing as we saw in mid lane, which is we've got this 3-wave crash, and now the cannon minion is getting hung up. And let's see, are we going to shove the cannon minion in right away, or are we going to let the cannon minion push into us and get reinforced by their minion wave so that we have this nice wave pushing into us? Let's see. Can see the same ward again. I didn't go for it because we were in such a safe position bot lane this game that we didn't even need to ward. mean, it ends up actually being pretty neutral. The minions, again, it's a learning process for everybody here at the start of the season. The minions died so fast that entire cannon wave died and was cleared out before the 5th wave got there. And so the 5th wave ends up fairly neutral, despite the fact that we had a cannon wave bouncing back into us. It's really crazy how much these wave dynamics have changed. So we've got that situation. Let's see. So we've been through the bot lane, the top lane, and the mid lane situation in this game, I believe. So that should be it.